the visitor who carried the past. The morning sky above Windsor shimmered with pale silver clouds, the kind that blurred the horizon and made time itself feel slower. Inside the palace walls, everything moved with practiced precision. Guards changing posts, staff polishing railings, aides preparing documents for meetings that would shape nations. But in one quiet wing of the palace, time felt fragile. Catherine stood near the tall window of her private sitting room, fingers lightly resting against the glass. The cold surface grounded her, reminded her she was still here, still steady, still standing. The past year had changed her. Not just physically, not just emotionally, but spiritually. Illness had forced her to confront something she had spent years outrunning: vulnerability. For the first time since marrying into the royal family, she had experienced life outside the armor of duty. Hospital rooms didn't care about titles. Treatment schedules ignored royal calendars. Pain ignored protocol. Yet every time she stepped into public view she smiled, not because she had to, but because she refused to let fear define her story. Behind her, the fireplace crackled softly. A knock came. "Your Royal Highness," her private secretary said gently, stepping inside. "There is someone requesting to see you." Catherine turned slowly. "Is it scheduled?" "No, ma'am. Unscheduled visits almost never happened. Not here. Not at this level." "Who is it?" The secretary hesitated, just for a second. "Someone who says she knew you before all of this." The words lingered. Her name? Emily Carter. Catherine's breath caught slightly. University days. Shared coffees. Late-night study sessions. Dreams that felt simple back then: careers, travel, independence. A time when her biggest fear was failing an exam, not facing global scrutiny. "She says it's important," he added quietly. "And she insisted she wouldn't go to the press." That changed everything. Catherine nodded slowly. "I'll see her." The blue drawing room. Emily stood near the window when Catherine entered. For a moment neither woman spoke. Time folded inward. Emily looked older, of course, but still carried the same quick intelligence in her eyes. The same honesty. The same emotional transparency Catherine had always admired. "Kate," Emily started, then corrected herself quickly. "Your Royal Highness." Catherine smiled softly. "Emily is fine. Kate is fine. For now." Emily exhaled, tension breaking slightly. They sat. Tea sat untouched between them. "I didn't come here to cause problems," Emily said finally. "I came because I thought you deserved to hear something privately first." Catherine felt a quiet heaviness settle in her chest. "What is it?" Emily clasped her hands. "It's about someone who used to work inside royal security." Catherine blinked, surprised. "Not scandal. Not gossip. Something else." "Go on." "There are rumors," Emily said carefully. "Not about relationships. Not about money. About someone trying to sell private schedule information." The room felt colder. Emily continued quickly. "I don't have proof of a full breach. But I heard enough to know, if it becomes public it could be twisted. It could look like internal failure." Catherine sat very still. The monarchy didn't just rely on tradition. It relied on trust. "Why tell me?" "Because I knew you before you were all of this," Emily said. "And because I know you protect people. Even when it costs you." Silence stretched. Then Catherine spoke quietly. "Do you trust your source?" "Yes." "Do you trust me to handle this quietly?" Emily nodded immediately. "Yes." The king, who was already watching. Later that evening, Catherine sat in her study, reviewing the small amount of information Emily had brought. Nothing explosive, but enough to be dangerous if misunderstood. A knock sounded. Before she could answer, the door opened gently. King Charles entered. Not as a monarch. As a father figure who had learned, through decades of pressure, when something was wrong. "My dear," he said softly, sitting across from her. "I hear you had an unexpected guest." Catherine studied him carefully. He wasn't interrogating. He was concerned. "Yes." "And?" "She brought information that could become damaging if misinterpreted." He nodded slowly. "Internal?" "Yes." He sighed, not in frustration but in recognition. "The crown survives not because it is perfect," he said quietly, "but because it learns before others discover its weaknesses." She met his eyes. "I want to handle this quietly. Carefully." "You will," he said. "Because you always do." Then softer. "You are stronger than you believe, Catherine. Not because you never break, but because you always choose who you rebuild yourself to be." Night over Windsor. That night, Catherine stood again by the window. But this time she didn't feel fragile. She felt focused. Someone had trusted her with a warning. Someone believed she would protect more than reputation, protect people. And that, she realized, was the real weight of royalty. Not crowns. Not ceremonies. Responsibility. Behind her, the palace lights glowed warm and steady. Outside, mist rolled across the gardens. And somewhere in the distance, history kept moving forward. She wasn't just part of it anymore. She was shaping it. The quiet investigation. The palace woke before sunrise. It always did. But on this morning, Catherine had already been awake for hours. The sky outside her window glowed with the faintest hint of pale blue, and the palace garden still wore a coat of silver frost. Somewhere in the distance, a clock tower struck 5, each chime echoing through stone corridors older than most nations. Catherine sat at her writing desk, untouched tea growing cold beside her. Sleep had not come easily. Not because of fear. Because of responsibility. Emily's words replayed in her mind. Someone inside security might be leaking private schedule information. Not confirmed. Not proven. But dangerous enough to matter. The monarchy didn't collapse from one mistake. It collapsed from small cracks left ignored. And Catherine had never been someone who ignored problems. The first step, quietly asking questions. By mid-morning, Catherine requested a private meeting. Not with advisors. Not with political staff. With Sir Andrew Holt, head of royal protection, a man who had served the crown for nearly 30 years. The meeting took place in a small strategy room, intentionally chosen. No staff traffic. No recording systems. No observers. Sir Andrew stood when she entered. Your Royal Highness. Please sit, Sir Andrew. He did, but she noticed immediately the subtle alertness in his posture. Not defensive. Professional. Sir Andrew, she said calmly, I'm going to ask you something and I need complete honesty. You will have it. She nodded once. Has there been any indication of internal information leaving protection channels? He didn't answer immediately. Instead he studied her, measuring how much she already knew. Then he exhaled slowly. There have been minor anomalies, he admitted. Catherine felt her heartbeat slow, not quicken. Confirmation meant clarity. What kind? Nothing catastrophic. But there were 2 occasions where media appeared suspiciously prepared for last-minute schedule changes. How recent? Within the last 4 months. Her mind connected timelines instantly. Not proof, but a pattern. Why wasn't this escalated to the king? Sir Andrew answered carefully. Because we had no confirmed source. And false accusations inside security can destroy careers and morale. She respected that. But now the risk had grown. I need you to begin a quiet internal audit, she said. No accusations. No panic. Just verification. He nodded immediately. Yes, Your Royal Highness. Then more quietly. May I ask, did someone warn you? She met his gaze calmly. Yes. He didn't ask who. And she respected him more for it. The weight of leadership. Later that afternoon, Catherine walked through the palace corridors with measured calm. But inside she felt something shifting. For years she had supported the crown. Now she was actively protecting it. The difference was subtle but powerful. As she passed a gallery lined with portraits of past monarchs, she slowed. Every face told a story of pressure, sacrifice, loneliness, and endurance. For the first time she understood them not as history, but as people. The king notices more than words. That evening, she joined King Charles for a small private dinner, something he had quietly begun arranging more often during her recovery year. No staff. No press. Just family. He watched her carefully over his glass of water. You are thinking 5 moves ahead tonight, he said. She smiled slightly. Is it that obvious? To someone who spent 70 years preparing for crisis? Yes. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. If there were a potential internal weakness, would you want to know before or after proof? Before, he said instantly. But only if the person bringing it forward is prepared to handle it responsibly. She nodded. I am. He studied her a long moment. Then he said something that surprised her. You have grown into something this institution desperately needs. She raised an eyebrow slightly. Resilience. No, he said softly. Humanity. Meanwhile, outside palace walls. Across London, in a quiet apartment overlooking the Thames, Emily sat with her laptop open, staring at encrypted messages. She wasn't a palace insider anymore. But she still had journalist instincts. And something felt off. Her source, usually reliable, had gone silent. Then a new message appeared. Stop digging. This is bigger than you think. Emily's stomach tightened. This wasn't just about gossip anymore. This was about power. And power always fought back. The first real lead. 3 days later, Sir Andrew requested another private meeting. Catherine knew immediately from his tone this mattered. We found something, he said once they were seated. Go on. One officer accessed movement logs outside his assigned clearance window. Once. 3 times. Name? He hesitated. Officer Daniel Reeves. 10 years of spotless service. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. This was the part leadership never showed publicly. Good people could still make bad choices. Bring him in for quiet review, she said. No accusations yet. Sir Andrew nodded. The emotional cost. That night, Catherine finally allowed herself to sit alone in the palace chapel. No cameras. No staff. Just silence. She didn't pray for strength. She prayed for wisdom. Because strength could push forward blindly. Wisdom knew when to slow down. And right now, people's lives, careers, and reputations hung in the balance. The interview that changed everything. The next day, Officer Reeves sat across from Sir Andrew and a legal observer. He looked nervous but not guilty. I accessed logs because I was tracking a possible external breach, he said quickly. I didn't report it because I wasn't sure yet. Did you share information with anyone outside security? Sir Andrew asked. No, he said instantly. And Catherine, watching remotely, believed him. Not from evidence. From instinct. Years of meeting world leaders had taught her something simple. People who lie about loyalty rarely defend it first. A new suspicion. If Reeves wasn't the leak, then someone else was better at hiding it. And that was far more dangerous. The storm approaches. Late that night, Catherine received a secure message from Emily. I think I know where the pressure is coming from. But it's not just one person. Be careful who you trust. Catherine stared at the message long after the screen dimmed. This wasn't just about palace schedules anymore. This was about influence, reputation, and possibly, someone trying to weaken public trust quietly. The princess who refused to panic. Standing again at her window, Catherine watched the palace lights flicker across the gardens. Fear would be easy. But she had learned something this past year. Life was fragile. Time was precious. And truth mattered more than comfort. Whoever was behind this, she would find them. Not for power. Not for reputation. But for the stability of everything the crown represented. And for the people who trusted it. When rumors find the light. The first sign that the situation was changing didn't come from inside the palace. It came from a headline. Not a direct accusation. Not a scandal. Just a question. Are royal movements becoming predictable? Catherine saw it early in the morning during her daily briefing review. The article itself was careful, almost too careful. It cited unnamed observers, patterns noticed by analysts, and public event predictability. No direct allegations. No mention of internal leaks. But the implication was clear. Someone was testing the waters. She closed the tablet slowly. Across from her, her communications advisor shifted uncomfortably. It's gaining traction online, he admitted. Mostly speculation forums and commentary panels. Official media? Not yet. That mattered. Once major networks stepped in, control would become almost impossible. The pressure of silence. By noon, the palace press office had prepared a standard statement. Royal scheduling reflects careful coordination for public engagement and security. Safe. Neutral. True but incomplete. Catherine approved it. Because sometimes stability required restraint, not reaction. Still, she knew something was shifting outside palace walls. And whoever was behind it was moving carefully. Intentionally. Emily's discovery. Across London, Emily sat inside a small cafe, laptop open, coffee untouched. She had spent 2 days tracing digital trails tied to her original source. And now she understood why they had gone silent. Because someone else was watching them too. Encrypted transfers. Anonymous metadata masking. Communication patterns tied to private PR firms. Not journalists. Strategists. Which meant this wasn't just information leaking. This was narrative shaping. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She ignored it. Then another message came. You are looking in places that will hurt you. Walk away. Emily swallowed hard. But instead of stopping, she opened another database window. Inside the palace, the emotional cost grows. Catherine found herself smiling through 2 public engagements that afternoon. Meeting charity representatives. speaking with young volunteers, listening to community leaders. And she meant every word she said. But beneath it, her mind was calculating risks. If rumors grew, the public wouldn't see nuance. They would see instability. And stability was what the crown existed to symbolize. King Charles makes a decision. That evening, Charles requested a private strategy session. No aides. No staff. Just him and Catherine. "I believe," he said carefully, "that someone is testing public reaction before releasing something larger." She nodded. "I think so too." He folded his hands slowly. "Then we must decide now. Quiet investigation, or controlled transparency?" It was a historic choice. Both had risks. Catherine spoke slowly. "If we move too fast, we validate rumors. And if we move too slow," he asked, "we lose control of the narrative." Silence stretched. Then he said quietly, "You have good instincts. Follow them." The officer who wasn't guilty. Meanwhile, Officer Reeves sat at home, staring at his phone. He had served loyally for 10 years. And now he felt like every movement was being watched. Because inside security, suspicion spreads quietly. He had done nothing wrong. But someone else had. And he knew if the truth didn't surface quickly, trust would fracture across the entire team. The second wave. 3 days later, a new article appeared. Still not direct, but sharper. Security experts question royal information containment. Now commentators were discussing theoretical vulnerabilities. Still no proof. Still no names. But public curiosity had begun. And once curiosity started, it rarely stopped on its own. Catherine's hardest realization. Late that night, she sat in her private study alone. And admitted something she hadn't wanted to face. This might not be about destroying the monarchy. It might be about controlling it. Through fear. Through pressure. Through slow erosion of public confidence. And that was far more dangerous than scandal. Because scandals burn fast. Distrust burns slowly. Emily crosses a line. In her apartment, Emily accessed a restricted archive using credentials she technically wasn't supposed to use anymore. She hated doing it. But she needed answers. And what she found made her stomach drop. Several analysis firms, recently hired to monitor royal public perception, were connected through shell companies to a single international consulting group. A group known for political influence campaigns. Not illegal, but ethically complicated. The message Catherine didn't expect. At 2:14 a.m., Catherine received a secure call request. "Emily." She answered immediately. "I think this is bigger than internal leaks," Emily said quietly. "I think someone is trying to shape how people see royal stability." Catherine closed her eyes briefly. "Can you prove it?" "Not yet. But I can prove financial connections. That may be enough to understand motive." Silence. Then Emily said, "I'm sorry you're dealing with this while also dealing with everything else." Catherine looked toward the window. "I learned something this year," she said quietly. "Life doesn't pause for difficulty. It asks who you choose to become during it." The public storm builds. By the end of the week, talk shows began mentioning the topic casually. Still respectful. Still cautious. But present. Public trust hadn't broken. But it had started asking questions. And questions Catherine knew were powerful. The turning point. Standing in the palace gardens at dusk, Catherine finally felt something shift inside her. Not fear. Resolve. If someone wanted to weaken the crown quietly, then the crown would respond quietly. With truth. With stability. With patience. And with strength. Because institutions didn't survive centuries by reacting emotionally. They survived by choosing their moments carefully. The calm before revelation. Inside her study, Catherine reviewed the growing evidence network. Connections forming. Motives emerging. Not chaos. Strategy. And if strategy had been used against them, then strategy would protect them. She closed the folder slowly. The palace lights glowed golden across the gardens. And for the first time since Emily arrived, Catherine felt certain of one thing. The truth was coming. And when it did, it would not destroy them. It would define them. The hidden architects. Rain fell softly over Windsor that morning. Not a storm. Not dramatic. Just steady, quiet rain, the kind that made the world feel thoughtful. Inside the palace, the atmosphere felt similar. Focused. Measured. Waiting. Catherine stood at her desk reviewing the latest compiled reports from Sir Andrew and the quiet financial tracing Emily had risked so much to gather. The pattern was now undeniable. Not chaos. Coordination. The network behind the rumors. The consulting group Emily discovered had quietly funded. media analysis firms, reputation monitoring teams, social narrative forecasting groups. On the surface, nothing illegal. But when layered together, it showed something else. Someone had been studying royal public trust, not to support it but to predict how it could be weakened. Not destroyed overnight. Shifted slowly. Catherine leaned back in her chair, thinking carefully. If exposed publicly, it could cause panic. If ignored, it could grow. This required precision. The king's private council. That afternoon, King Charles called a private council meeting, smaller than usual. Only Sir Andrew, legal counsel, the communications director. Catherine. No political staff. No outside advisors. Tell me plainly, Charles said calmly. Is this an attack, or preparation for leverage? Sir Andrew answered carefully. Likely leverage, Your Majesty. Catherine added quietly. Someone wants influence, not collapse. Charles nodded slowly. In modern times, he said, influence is often more valuable than power. The room fell silent, because everyone knew he was right. The unexpected breakthrough. Later that evening, Emily sent new data. One executive connected to the consulting network had scheduled a private meeting in London, with a mid-level media distributor. Not a major network. Someone who could test stories quietly before major exposure. This was the moment Catherine had been waiting for. Not confrontation. Understanding. The strategy that changed everything. Instead of blocking the narrative, Catherine suggested something bold. Release a controlled transparency report, she told the council. Not about the network. Not about suspicions. But about strengthening internal security modernization. Positive framing. Proactive leadership. Confidence, not defense. The communications director blinked in surprise. That would shift the entire conversation. Exactly, Catherine said calmly. Charles watched her with quiet pride. You are learning the oldest royal skill, he said. She tilted her head slightly. Which is? Winning battles before they are announced. The officer who became key. Meanwhile, Officer Reeves, previously suspected, was brought into a new internal monitoring task force. Not because he had failed, because he had questioned things. And sometimes, questioning was the strongest form of loyalty. When he was told, he looked stunned. You still trust me? He asked. Sir Andrew replied simply. More than ever. Emily's risk grows. Emily noticed something unsettling. The anonymous warnings stopped, which meant one of two things. They had given up. They were watching differently. She moved carefully now. Encrypted everything. Backed up everything. Because truth, she knew, only mattered if it survived long enough to be revealed. The public narrative changes. 2 weeks later, the palace released the modernization statement. Clear. Forward-looking. Confident. Headlines shifted immediately. Royal household announces advanced security transparency measures. The rumor cycle slowed. Because instead of reacting, the palace had led. The consulting network retreats. Quietly. Subtly. Contracts were not renewed. Analysis projects shifted focus. Because their leverage strategy no longer worked. If public trust increased, pressure decreased. And pressure had been their only tool. The moment between Catherine and Charles. Late one evening, Charles joined Catherine in the garden walk. You handled this without creating enemies, he said. I tried. No, he said gently. You succeeded. She walked beside him in silence for a few moments. Then he added quietly. This institution needs protectors who understand people, not just power. She smiled softly. I learned from watching you. He chuckled. I learned from many mistakes. The emotional resolution begins. For the first time in weeks, Catherine slept peacefully. Not because everything was solved, but because the direction was clear. And clarity was stronger than fear. Emily receives one final message. 3 words. No threat. No warning. Just understood. Moving on. Emily exhaled deeply. Sometimes the biggest victories were the quietest ones. The palace stands, quietly stronger. Weeks later, life inside the palace felt normal again. Public duties, charity work, diplomatic meetings. But something had changed. Not visibly. Internally. The crown had adapted, strengthened. Without spectacle. Without scandal. Without fear. Catherine's final realization. Standing again at her window, where this journey had begun, Catherine watched the palace grounds wake into morning light. Power wasn't about control. It was about stability. And stability wasn't built through perfection. It was built through responsibility. the legacy of quiet strength. Spring arrived slowly at Windsor. Not all at once. First the frost disappeared from the gardens. Then small green shoots pushed through the soil. Then, almost overnight, the palace grounds filled with color. Catherine noticed these things more now. Illness had changed her sense of time. Before, she had measured life in schedules and obligations. Now she measured it in moments. The palace moves forward. The security modernization program had fully launched. Quiet upgrades. New digital monitoring layers. Stronger internal verification processes. Not dramatic enough for headlines, but strong enough to protect what mattered. Sir Andrew presented the final internal review during a small private meeting. No confirmed internal traitor, he said. Only external pressure attempts and predictive narrative modeling. Catherine nodded. That mattered. Because it meant trust inside the palace remained intact. And trust was harder to rebuild than reputation. Officer Reeves finds his confidence again. Months after the investigation, Reeves walked palace grounds on duty with steady confidence again. The suspicion cloud had lifted. But something else remained. Purpose. He now trained new officers, teaching them not just protection tactics but something deeper. Loyalty isn't just following orders, he told them. It's asking questions when something feels wrong. Emily's new path. Emily stepped away from high-risk investigative journalism. Not out of fear. Out of choice. She began working in ethical media analysis, helping organizations understand how public trust could be built instead of manipulated. One afternoon, she received a handwritten note delivered by secure courier. No royal seal. Just simple stationery. Thank you for choosing integrity when it mattered most. See? Emily smiled. And framed it. The king sees the future. One evening, Charles and Catherine walked the palace gardens together. The air smelled of fresh roses and wet earth. You have done something important, Charles said quietly. I just did what needed doing. No, he said gently. You reminded this institution that strength doesn't need to be loud. She looked out across the gardens. I think people don't trust perfection anymore, she said softly. I think they trust honesty. Charles nodded slowly. And you have given them that. The public never knows, and that is the point. No scandal ever broke. No dramatic headlines ever appeared. No crisis speeches were needed. And that was the success. Because sometimes leadership wasn't about winning public battles. It was about preventing them from happening at all. Catherine's personal victory. Months later, Catherine stood backstage before a public health awareness speech. Not as a patient. Not as someone recovering. But as someone who had walked through fear and found purpose waiting on the other side. She spoke about resilience. About community. About how strength often looked quiet from the outside. And people listened. Because authenticity carried farther than perfection ever could. The children grow watching closely. One afternoon, George asked her something while walking through the gardens. Is being strong about never being scared? She knelt beside him. No, she said gently. It's about choosing what kind of person you want to be, even when you are scared. He nodded thoughtfully. And she realized something. The greatest legacy wasn't reputation. It was example. The palace, 1 year later. Time moved forward as it always did. Seasons changed. World events shifted. Public attention moved on. But inside palace walls, systems were stronger. Teams were closer. And leadership felt more human. Not weaker. Human. Emily visits again. This time scheduled. Properly. Not as a warning. As a friend. They laughed about university memories. Talked about life. Talked about how strange and beautiful life could be when it forced you to grow. Before leaving, Emily said quietly. You changed more than you realize. Catherine shook her head slightly. No, she said. I just listened when someone chose to do the right thing. The final moment. One evening, long after meetings ended and palace halls fell quiet, Catherine stood once more at her window. The same window. The same gardens. But a different woman. Not someone defined by pressure. Not someone defined by illness. Not someone defined by duty alone. Someone defined by choice. The choice to lead with calm. The choice to protect quietly. The choice to stand steady when uncertainty tried to shake everything. The palace lights glowed warm behind her. The world moved forward outside. And she understood something fully now. History wasn't written only by dramatic moments. It was written by quiet decisions. Made when no one was watching. Final closing. The crown did not stand because it was flawless. It stood because, generation after generation, someone chose responsibility over comfort. And sometimes, The strongest leaders were the ones history barely noticed, because they prevented storms before they ever reached the shore.